How's that happen then? Video games cost $70 now. That's just what they cost because a handful of very wealthy people decided that's what they should cost now. And I'm not saying that the video game price hike is unacceptable, but I am saying that this cost me $13. It's from UOOE, right? And I got it for like ADHD because I was diagnosed with that recently. And it's got all the fidgety cube stuff on it, but it's like got loads. And it's weird, right? That won't show up on the green screen, there's too much green. Anyway, the point is $13 and I've got more out of this than anything on the fucking PS5 so far. Also, the $70 price point is unacceptable. That said, you don't have to look very far to find some games media pundits falling over themselves to defend the video game industry's decision to raise prices to $70. The excuse is old and well worn and something that's been thoroughly discredited over the past several years, but they keep trotting the same old trash out. So let's have a discussion about the $70 price point for video games now, shall we? Because it's indefensible, no matter how many people try to defend it.
We got some hardcore cum denial, brother.
Anyway, if you're ever looking for a sufficiently infuriating snapshot of wanton, ignorant privilege, then you need look no further than a games media pundit going to bat for a multi-billion-dollar AAA corporation. Their arguments in favour of price gouging, exploitatively addictive monetization, and other forms of adding yet more dollars to an industry already raking in billions speaks volumes to their position of comfort and their inability to grasp exactly how much money other people have or don't have. Oh, $70 isn't that big of a deal? Shut up. So eager to see already very rich people become richer, they speak as if everyone is as willing to throw their money at game publishers as they seem to be. Although, let's be honest, far too many people are.
The $70 AAA price point. It's about time,
beams one headline on the issue, with all the triumphant satisfaction I'd personally reserve for universal healthcare. You know, financial issues that are actually overdue. Not a company that just made $1.2 billion in microtransaction money, piling another $10 on top of an already overpriced Call of Duty retread. One that's been broken all fucking weekend, great use of $70. You already know what the article says. It's the same bloody argument every article defending the monetization practices of video game publishers makes. It trots out the usual excuses we've been thoroughly discrediting for years, but because almost every pundit completely ignores this show, they've never addressed them nor advanced the conversation. Instead, for years, pundits have kept regurgitating the same capitalist apologia, bending over backwards to defend companies that would burn their homes to the fucking ground if there was profit in it. Although, before we go on, quick correction, I did say excuses. Plural. In truth, the people defending these corporations only ever have one.
The $60 price point has stuck around for 15 years and 2 entire console generations, despite some major increases to game development budgets during that time.
Goes the argument, with all the predictability of an argument that's been made without modification for an entire decade.
Most justifications for the current price hike focus on those development costs, and with good reason, even leaving aside the dramatic increase in the fidelity of game assets and systems that consumers demand now. Compared to 15 years ago, the sheer volume of assets that modern games require is also a huge factor to bear in mind.
I like the subtle bit of customer blaming in that quote. It's actually a very common tactic, is to say that the customers asked for it. Because you see, it's not the game industry's fault that it pushes graphics to the exclusion of all else. It's our fault. We demanded it. Demand, right? We've talked about this as well, this idea that all of these consumers
consumers are demanding these ridiculously expensive high-fidelity games. Oh, don't get me wrong, companies like Ubisoft have trained their audiences to expect everything to be a massive open world, but it was their decision to push that. Even as people were saying, no, we don't want everything to be open world, Yves Guillemot, friend of sex abusers, and also Ubisoft CEO, I guess, has gone on record saying Ubisoft specifically doesn't want to make small-scale games. That the company wants all these massive, expensively created open worlds because they make them a lot of money. He's literally gone on record to say that these massive games are, and I quote, sustainable. He said it's sustainable because the world is big and the number of players that can play our games is immense. What we've seen in the last few years is the number of players that play our games is constantly growing. So, it turns out that making these games that are too expensive to make is actually good for business. Also, quick question for Ubisoft. How's the investigation into decades of credible sex abuse allegations at Ubisoft going?
Not yet, Snake! It's not over yet!
Yeah, the consumers are demanding so many expensive games constantly. That's why some of the biggest games in the world aren't actually that lavishly graphically detailed. Your Fortnite, your Minecraft, your fucking Fall Guys. Oh yeah, the world is demanding that every single game break the bank, isn't it? Also, it's worth pointing out that with a fair few of these so-called AAA video games, at least half, sometimes most of the massive budget goes towards marketing. Not development! No graphics! Marketing. Fuck's sake. But regardless of the scale or the expense of the project, do you really think that AAA game publishers put games out to lose money? No, they've been selling games for $60 because they make money. The multi-billion-dollar industry makes money selling its games. If it doesn't, then it's a failed business, mate. Anyway, that's the only half-credible argument the article I'm quoting makes. It's the only argument these articles ever make, seemingly unaware that they're not the first to say it, and that what they're saying has zero fucking merit anymore. I'm not here to pick on just one article, by the way. In fact, I've not been naming names because I specifically don't want anyone picked on. This comical take that $70 is an overdue price hike can be found all over the shop. The problem I have is with establishment media as a whole, because I'm at the end of my fucking tether with it. A $60 game enjoyed over 8 to 20 hours on the low end is still a better value than a movie ticket, reads one article stuffed with false equivalents. The economics don't change all that much when you bump it up to $70. The contrast is even more stark when you realise that the cost of a movie ticket has been steadily increasing over the last 15 years, while AAA video games all cost the same. Even your Netflix subscription costs more than it did just a few years ago. When you look at the density of modern video games, the graphical fidelity, the multiplayer modes, the open world systems, games have actually been getting cheaper for consumers over the last 15 years. Raising a game's basic asking price to $70 won't eliminate publishers' need or desire to exploit these further revenue streams, talking about fucking microtransactions and all that bullshit, but it may help make up for the bottom line deficits brought on by ballooning development costs for graphically intensive titles in the console's coming ray tracing era. Brilliant. $70 for ray tracing you can't have if you want a game to run at the normal frame rate of 60 frames per second. And in the year 2020 current year argument, 60 frames per second really should be the fucking norm by now. First, let's look at the publisher's side of things. You really don't have to, mate. Their argument is a simple matter of inflation and ballooning costs associated with creating increasingly complex and elaborately detailed games. Using pure inflation as a baseline, games will actually be cheaper at $70 in 2020 than they were at $60 at the beginning of the Xbox 360 PlayStation 3 generation. $60 in 2006 is the equivalent of roughly $76 now. What everybody's failing to understand here is that $60 for most people is a shitload of money. You can sit there all day long thinking $60 isn't that big of a deal, which says a lot about you, while telling everyone else they're getting a bargain. Oh, and before anyone chimes in with, well, if they're that poor they shouldn't have video games, guess what, dickhead? Poor people deserve to have fun as well. Yes, game prices haven't raised. Wages are stagnant. If they were raising prices every single year, they'd soon run out of people who could buy their shit. Also, all of these arguments assume that we agree that $60 has always been an acceptable price for these games, when in reality, not every AAA game is actually worth $60. In fact, a massive percentage are explicitly not worth it. Many of these games come out broken, unfinished, buggy, rushed, promising content updates that may actually never come. $60 in exchange for what these games are offering and what these games are selling behind the entry fee? It's not a fucking deal, mate.
And I'm not saying bollocks. And I'm not bollocks. 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 And I'm not saying that this... Oh, fuck. Even got it wrong. Bollocks.
In any normal creative industry, once again, parroting. Game prices haven't raised in years, but what about inflation though? Should be considered hack writing. I'm sorry, it's completely hackneyed garbage because it's such an old, unconvincing, weak excuse by now. Or again, it would be considered old and weak if the people making the excuses were ever interested in catching themselves up to where the rest of us are, rather than spewing the same guff they've been spewing for nigh on 10 fucking years now. So let's look at why what's being said is complete bollocks. Again. First of all, like any excuse justifying the wanton bullshit of so-called AAA video game companies, the validation only works in a bubble, robbed of all context and socio-economic factors. Yes, if you only look at the fact that games have stayed at $60 for years, and if you only consider that in relation to development costs, you can make a half point and skip away singing tra-la-la like so many pundits do when they've said their trite piece. No. Technically, on paper, game prices haven't raised in years. You know what also hasn't raised in years? Wages for millions and millions of Americans, both the ones buying and making games. Americans such as those working at Activision Blizzard, one of the very first companies to seize upon the notion that new generation games should cost a ridiculous $70. The pay disparity between the people making the games and the people actually profiting off them is among the worst in the United States, with some workers so underpaid they can't afford to eat in the staff cafeteria.
Taste the savings.
One veteran at Activision is making less than they made when they started, and yet I'm supposed to cry a fucking river because $60 just isn't enough anymore.
Oh, the inflation!
Except it is. It's plenty. Development costs have risen? Cool. You know what else has risen? The audience for these products, bringing in more money than ever. That's not speculation, that's fact. In fact, it's something Yves Jourmeau, friend of fuckboys, literally agrees with me on. Yes, very much like Jesus, development costs is risen. You know what else has risen? The revenue these products make, because they bring in more money than ever. That's how revenue works. And you know what else has fucking risen? The price of games. Yes, the price of games, and I'm talking about before the $70 hike. Because, as I've been ignored saying for years, the $60 to $70 price for most AAA games isn't the actual price. It's the shell price, the starter price, the cost of entry. Most of these games now feature additional monetization as standard, with a suite of psychologically manipulative microtransactions, content hoarding season passes, silver and gold editions, multiple collector's editions, and whatever god-awful monetization they'll come up with next. Also, they work their staff's fingers to the bone, keeping all of these live services going so they can keep making money, which they make. By the boatload. With season passes and deluxe editions in particular, the cost to have a complete game is fully exposed. This past gen, it would cost at least $80 to get a more complete experience, with some games offering a second deluxe tier at $100. With the price hike, we're already seeing deluxe editions now charge $90 at least, with the potential for ever more expensive versions past there. And I bought the Demon Souls one. I started this generation with buyer's remorse. $90! The first thing I bought, buyer's remorse on the very first game I bought on the PS5. Buyer's remorse on a From Software game. On Demon Souls. My beloved Demon Souls. And if that ain't the fucking video game industry in a goddamn nutshell. As time's gone on, games have demonstrably offered less content in the basic versions, with the kind of stuff we used to see offered as part of a complete product now reserved as DLC. If the cost of AAA games had risen in line with the US Consumer Price Index over the past 15 years, that $60 price tag would have risen to $80. Yeah. It has. It raised to $80 fucking years ago, mate. They were just stealthy as fuck about it. Now, with the new generation here to jam more sticky fingers into our wallets, the price for a complete experience has blitzed past 80 and is pushing closer to $100. And you can't tell me they're not the complete editions, because when they re-release all these games months later with the DLC attached, that's exactly what they fucking call them! That's also something people don't really talk about when they talk about the high cost of making games and why they need to charge so much. They never talk about the double dipping, or sometimes the triple dipping, or fuck knows however many times they've dipped now with fucking Skyrim. Can't wait for that to come to PS5. Digital distribution has upped the margins on game sales that no longer have a physical manufacturing cost. In fact, publishers still charge exactly the same for a digital version of a game. Something they continue to do even as physical copies become increasingly phased out, representing yet more money for yet less effort. And they will never lower the prices of those games. In fact, as we've just seen, they're only rising. It cannot be understated exactly how much money is torrentially pouring into the game industry, thanks to the absurd level of monetization they feature. As noted earlier, Activision made $1.2 billion this past year just from microtransactions. Not basic sales, not deluxe editions, DLC, etc. Just the microtransactions. And where does that $1.2 billion go? Well, most of it seems to go entirely to the executive class, with billionaire Bobby Kotick funneling millions and millions and millions to himself and his high-ranking buddies. You're starting to see why I'm getting upset about this subject. New executives get millions in bonuses before they've so much as lifted a finger, all while the people in the company's lower echelons are forced to choose between food and rent. If industry leaders were genuinely concerned about money, they could try not literally gifting themselves millions of dollars of company money, but they don't. No, when they need to save cash to make themselves look even more successful to their investors, rather than lose a single drop of their personal wealth, they'll instigate a round of layoffs, making hundreds of people lose their jobs. You need to really think about that before you try and defend the decisions these people make, okay? The millionaires running game companies would rather ruin 700 lives than lose money they literally do not need and will never need again because they're millionaires. This is what actually happens. Even as companies boast of record revenue and healthy profits, some excuse makers will tell you they support high prices and microtransactions because they care about game developers and want to see them keep their jobs. This is naive bullshit. Layoffs happen whether a company is making or losing money. It's a sick and twisted part of their business to bring people in, chew them up, spit them out, underpaid and vastly overworked, to flood a job market full of hundreds of other underpaid, overworked people who were jettisoned so a man with hundreds of millions of dollars can make another 40 million in a year. Layoffs are expected, planned, and utterly perverse as a result. For fuck's sake, these companies steal from us annually. You do know that, right? They make and sell their games here, but claim they're coming from empty basements around the globe, using offshore tax havens like those in Holland to avoid paying dues on any of the money they're raking in. Activision, as we've so often pointed out, doesn't pay taxes thanks to this scam. Instead, the government uses our money to pay them a refund. A refund with our money on the zero tax they paid. Activision literally robs the American people every single fucking year. It robs us, for God's sake. And I'm supposed to sympathise with these fucking monsters, am I? I'm supposed to empathise with the decision makers in the AAA industry for raising prices while they continue to make millions exploiting their workers and billions exploiting their audiences. I'm supposed to see where they are coming from? I don't fucking care where they're coming from. But if I were a religious person, I'd know where they were going. Bollocks. The game industry does not need this money. It does not deserve this money. Only if you compartmentalise the facts can you even begin to sound convincing when you pull out the violins and spin a yarn about how generous and selfless game publishers have been for not raising prices yet. Something they've only never done before because they felt they couldn't quite get away with it. In fact, Bobby Kotick's even admitted that before. Claimed he was joking when he said it, except any excuse he's ever had to actually do it, he's taken. So it wasn't a joke. You can't joke about doing something when you're doing it. That's called doing it. With the new generation, publishers have finally decided they can get away with it, and who can blame them for at least feeling that way? After all, they've collectively conned and scammed their way to billions upon billions of record-shattering revenue. They've preyed upon problem gamblers and other vulnerable players. They've swindled money out of children behind their parents' backs. They've made games offer less content while demanding ever more money. They've literally ruined the designs of entire video games to make them work with broken real money economies, and they've done nothing but make cash in the process, getting completely away with their ongoing get richer quicker schemes. Of course they now feel confident in tacking another tenner on. They could shoot someone on 5th Avenue and still get a 98 Metacritic average. Or if they're Ubisoft, well, you know what they did. And so do the outlets getting their review copies from them. In past years, the game prices haven't raised bullshit has been trotted out to justify all the monetization we've just talked about. Now it's being used to justify a price rise. So I'm curious to see what the apologists will say to games raising their prices while keeping all their anti-customer monetary practices. Because they will. They are. 2K Games was the first to charge $70 for a game, an NBA 2K game no less. One of the worst types of games for fee-to-pay transactions from one of the most avaricious publishers in the market. The microtransactions will continue, the DLC will continue, the season passes will continue, the multiple deluxe editions will continue, selling loot boxes to children will continue, and the $70 entry fee to these overcharging theme parks is pushing it, especially in a year of mass unemployment as we face the second major depression of a generation and an ongoing global pandemic. Look, buying games is a business expense for me, and I'm thinking twice about dropping $70 on some of these games, much less the almost $100 they want for versions with extra rubbish in them. Demon Souls! And I say all this as someone who is not stingy. In fact, I'm pretty fucking infantile with my money, and I'm getting reluctant to drop launch price cash. I don't know where some of these journalists are getting their money. If $70 is so easily acceptable, it sure as fuck can't be from journalism. A $70 entry ticket to a game with a high chance of demanding even more money once I get in? There's no real fucking excuse for it. In fact, the only fucking excuse for it so far appears to be a new generation. Because the games themselves sure as shit aren't great enough to justify it themselves.
Now look, I know there are some people in games media and games journalism who view the job as a stepping stone to a cushy little PR gig, but if you're not one of those people, you don't have to do this. You don't have to go to bat for major AAA multi-billion-dollar corporations, because if you do, please understand, you're going to bat for thieves, for abusers, for predators. That is what you're defending. Those are the monsters you're speaking up for. And they're so fucking untouchably wealthy. They don't need you. They hate you. They have nothing but contempt for you. Yeah, you know, just a thought. Watch Dogs reviews were pretty glowing, huh? Thank God for me. That wasn't very cool. I just clutched it. Hang on. Thanks. This is good. Thank God for me.